welcome you all for Driving Impact with Diversity-Based Opportunity Funds presented by Start Out. My name is Emma. I am the Community Manager and Volunteer Manager with Start Out based in Portland, Oregon. I'm here to introduce you to who Start Out is and then turn over this event to our lovely moderator, Alexa Hall. So Start Out is a US-based nonprofit organization. We were founded in 2009. We focus on supporting LGBTQ entrepreneurs and startup founders. Our mission is to increase the number, diversity, and impact of LGBTQ entrepreneurs, and also to amplify their stories, ultimately to drive the economic empowerment of the queer community. Over the past 10 years, we have built a community of 17,000 members, and we are supporting presently over 300 entrepreneurs every year. We would like to say a big thank you to our current and valued sponsors, two of which were able to be key in putting this event on for us today, Morrison Foerster, as well as Bank of America Merrill Lynch. So thank you very much to our sponsors. We will hear more from them as this discussion moves forward, but without further ado, I would love to turn it over to our moderator, Alexa Hall, introduce our panelists. Then I will stop sharing my screen so that you can see everyone's lovely faces, and we can continue with the conversation. So Alexa, without further ado, I'll hand over to you.
Great, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here to talk about, all of the different commitments that tech companies have made to diverse communities in the past year and even beyond that. I currently work at Google. I'm a program manager in the Google Cloud for Startups area. I run our startup credits program and also our go-to-market strategy for startups. Previous to that, I was actually at Google for Startups, where I worked on a number of opportunity funds and also initiatives focused on Black founders that we launched last year. So this is an area that's really important to me, and I think hopefully the funds that have been started recently will have impacts for years to come. I want the other panelists to be able to introduce themselves, so I will just go ahead and pass it off to the next person I'm seeing, Fredo Silva.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you all. My name is Fredo Silva. Full name is Alfredo, but I go by Fredo. And I'm a partner in the San Francisco office of Morrison & Foerster. It's a full service law firm. We've got about 16 offices around the world and about 1,000 lawyers and do all kinds of work. But relevant to y'all, I do a lot of corporate work with emerging companies and venture capital investors, as well as focusing a lot on impact investments and social enterprises. A lot of clients in the fintech space, as well as ag and other industries. I also co-chair our social enterprise and impact investment practice group and sit on our pro bono committee. And so I just spend a lot of time dealing with opportunity and impact, and I'm on our diversity strategy committee as well. So this stuff covers both my practice and personal and professional life. So I'm really looking forward to the panel.
That's great, thanks. I think next we'll go with Damola.
Hey everybody, nice to meet you, nice to be here. My name is Damola Ogunepe. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Civic Eagle. We're a data intelligence and collaboration software platform for lobbyists, public policy teams, and issue-based advocacy organizations. I'm based in Atlanta. Rest of the team is fully, well, the entire team is remote only. So we got folks in DC, New York, I'm in Atlanta, Minnesota, and California. We've raised $3 million in venture capital to date and just crossed 800K in ARR. So super excited to be part of the conversation, and nice to see everybody.
That's awesome. Congrats, Damola. I think next it's Kimlin.
Thank you, Alexa. Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be a part of this discussion. I am Kimlin Harris, and I'm with Bank of America. I'm an ESG program executive, and I'm aligned to Bank of America's $1.25 billion 5-year racial equality and economic opportunity initiative. In this role, I'm really focused on executing programming to advance economic opportunity for communities of color and under-resourced communities, really working to identify and build partnerships with organizations and community leaders and influencers to determine what are the needs of these under-resourced communities and how we at Bank of America can help support in a really impactful way through capital and through resources. A large portion of our $1.25 billion commitment is aligned to equity investments into minority entrepreneurs. We've initially allocated $200 million and just this week increased that to $350 million in equity investments specifically towards, again, under-resourced entrepreneurs of color. So happy to join this discussion today.
That's awesome. And then last but not least, we have Brianna.
Hey everyone, excited to be a part of this conversation. I run a company called Journey Foods based in Austin, Texas. I'm in Chicago right now, where I originally started my entrepreneurial career. At Journey Foods, we build software and portfolio intelligence solutions for the world's most well-known food companies, as well as some very exciting startups. We're focused on making sure that all of our food, beverage, and packaging companies can achieve product prosperity and growth in nutrition, sustainability, and cost needs. We've raised $4 million to date. We have investors in 3 different continents, achieved quite a bit of ARR as well, more than 2 million in just a short time here as a startup. I'm a serial entrepreneur in the food world. I also am an angel investor in several startups, especially minority-led startups in North America. And I've spent time at Google and Cleveland Avenue Ventures, where scaled Beyond Meat to IPO. So happy to be here as both an entrepreneur and investor.
That's awesome. Thanks, everyone. So I'm just going to kick us off with, when we talk about opportunity funds, what do we mean? How are we defining that for this discussion? I have some thoughts about it, but I'm actually going to pass it to you guys first. So anyone who has a burning thought on this, you're welcome to go.
I'll go ahead and go first. I think that people are using it for meaning a lot of things, right? Like you can be talking about the opportunity within your organization or within the local community in terms of programming, right? And like that's related to what your business is. When I think about it though, as a lawyer that works in the emerging company and venture capital space, I'm using it to talk about actual venture capital funds that have been set up with a focus specifically on diverse founders, whether Black, Latino, Latinx, LGBT, what have you. And these funds have been set up both by, oftentimes by corporate entities. So for example, one of our clients is SoftBank. They set up a $100 million opportunity fund that run parallel to their venture capital fund, the SoftBank Vision Fund. And so this opportunity fund is looking primarily at, I think, early stage Black and Latinx founders. And so that would be, I think, different than, and I think what a lot of people here may be interested in. I think, though, there's probably other uses of the term that I'll let maybe other panelists speak about that are less focused on like equity or convertible debt or safe investments in a startup and more about community.
Yeah, I want to jump in there. When I think about opportunity fund, I think about the missed opportunities to invest in multi-trillion dollars of, community access when it comes to founders that understand the communities that have often been overlooked through products and services that have been underfunded. Specifically Black and Latinx entrepreneurs and communities are very creative, very resilient communities, and they unlock, several trillion dollars of at least GDP here in the United States. And so I think about the opportunity to not only fund those brilliant ideas, but also to accelerate those communities to build products that can grow even outside of their own.
I think the term, so I used to work in philanthropy, and I think that this is a term that gets kind of like thrown up a lot for asset allocators of different types. It's like, oh, this is an opportunity. We hadn't thought about this before, so quick, let's get in. I think that, last year after the murder of George Floyd and the resulting social unrest, a lot of companies we're trying to find ways to engage particularly the Black community around economic development. and think about ways in which they could enable sort of access to funds and to different resources that they have to grow Black-owned businesses, and seeing economic development as a source of community development for the Black community. And I think that this is something that continues to be part of the conversation. And I think it's one that should be expansive. I'm also an angel investor, and I invest in all types of businesses in Latin America and also in the US. And a big focus I have is, investing in people who maybe other people would have overlooked because of their background, but I actually think that, similar to what you said, Rihanna, it's because of their background that they're going to be more successful than someone else who maybe is doing a similar thing or creating a similar solution. So did anybody else have a comment for that question? We can move on. All right, good. Next question is, how are opportunity funds selecting investment targets compared to other VCs? I know, Fredo, you had touched on this a little bit when you were speaking about SoftBank, but do any of the other panelists have examples of how opportunity funds might be setting up the funds themselves, or the eligibility criteria or the evaluation a little bit differently than they would their main VC funds? I will start calling on people. Fredo, do you want to?
No, I'll go. It's Kimberly. Yeah, and I'll tell you, my background at Bank of America is primarily on the philanthropy side, even though I'm working with the equity investment team on getting these fund managers and funds identified. So I know enough just to be dangerous. But when we think about the 350 of capital that we want to infuse in support of minority-led funds, as well as funds that will impact minority and under-resourced businesses, the criteria pretty much is the same. I mean, I think that's the misconception when you think about the supporting this area of the population, that it somehow has to be less than, or we have to lower the standard or lower the criteria to support diverse entrepreneurs or minority-led funds, and that's just not the case. So, the due diligence that we do to evaluate is pretty much the same, but it's just finding that opportunity, opening the door, making the call to say that we're gonna look at startups, we're gonna look at fund managers that are new to this body of work. And so when we get to the actual evaluation piece of it, the criteria is the same. And I'm proud to say that we in just 10 months, we've identified almost 100 funds in 10 months, 270 million in capital in just under a year since we made the commitment last June. So, and to my earlier point, we started out thinking we would do 200 million over 4. We've done 270 in 10 months, and we had to increase it to 350 and counting. So that tells you that the opportunity is there once the call was made, right? We are not hurting for proposals at this point. We have hundreds. And so just to answer your question, the criteria, the due diligence process is the same.
Yeah, I think Kimberly gets at a major issue in impact investing generally, which is, are you looking for return first, impact first, or do you think impact and return should come in parallel and aren't at loggerheads? And it's not, and there's been a misconception in the community that if you want impact, you have to give up returns. And as Kimberly was showing, that's just not the case. Certainly not for every investment. That said, I would suggest that with respect to certain investors I'm looking at that are focused on diversity and are focused on impact, they actually are applying a different criteria, which is, it's not that they don't expect the venture to succeed, but they are not applying the same, selection criteria for their diversity fund and their diversity focused investments as they are for certain other ones, right? Where the diligence focus and the qualification is less on, whether this is the best investment they could possibly be making with the money to get the highest return, and more about, is this a good team? Do we believe in the mission? Is the mission helpful to the community? And I think that the focus on diligence is a little bit less about like how strong is your patent portfolio, and more about, how are we going to ensure that we're locking in mission, that you're going to stay mission aligned, that we don't have an organization that is, minority and diversity owned right now, but a year down the road we'll have 4 white guys on the board and not keep that diversity. So I think that's a little bit of a slight difference, I think, in how some of these funds may be looking at their investments.
Have you guys seen anything different in the market about how the actual deals are being structured from opportunity funds? So the amount of equity fund managers are taking, is that any different? Or the way that they work with these portfolio companies as opposed to other portfolio companies? Are you seeing any difference there?
So I'll go again, and then I'll probably be quiet for like the next like 20 minutes as this stuff starts getting out of my area. But from the perspective of like the investments in the portfolio companies, I am seeing a little bit of difference, because what you're wanting to do is make sure that you have the data to track that the money that you're investing is being put to good purposes, right? That you're achieving the impact that you want. And so a lot of times we're seeing side letters that go alongside the main investment documents that are saying, report to me on how many women you have on the board, women you have in senior management and C-suite. Report to me on what if you're a female focused diversity fund, if you're focused on Black or Latinx community or BIPOC, give me those numbers. And there's always a little bit of push and take about like what's reportable given HR and whatever, but give me the data so that I can confirm. And I also see consequences, right? Where it's like, okay, well, if you are an LGBT company and owned and founded and have LGBT people managing it right now, but then later on you don't, I would like to get my money back maybe so I can deploy it somewhere else where there actually, are LGBT founders that are running the show, right? And so, if I take a convertible debt instrument, instead of having it convert automatically into the preferred round, it's like, well, it only does that if you are continuing to meet these standards. But if in your report I discover that actually no, like you no longer have LGBT people on the board and involved in owning the company, then instead of converting, give me my money back and just have me be redeemed so I can take it and deploy it somewhere else. So it's a combination of reporting and consequences. And that's on the portfolio company side. I think maybe I'll turn it over to somebody else to speak maybe about what they're seeing on the fund manager side.
Yeah, I'll go again just really quickly, just Fredo, just to reiterate what you said around the side letters and what we're seeing and kind of the ask. So taking that data request to the next level, which is what is the impact? That's what really matters to us, which is, we made this huge commitment and we're investing in making sure the capital is in the hand of under-resourced entrepreneurs, but what is the so what around that? So what we want to know is, we've made this investment with the goal of X, based on what we negotiated, are we getting X, right? We're going to create X amount of jobs in this market for this under-resourced community. Is that happening? Or, what is the impact of those dollars that we're infusing? That's what we want to know. And we also want to know if there are any challenges or any gaps that we can support. So when we think about the equity that we're infusing, what are the other wrap opportunities? Mentorship, having our equity team and our IB team work with the fund managers and work with the entrepreneurs directly to say, how can we help you with professional development and leadership and other things that are needed to run a small business beyond the capital? How do we support that? And how do we also bridge you to other partners, right? Nonprofit partners and other corporate partners that may be able to assist in this journey, going beyond the capital to see how we can really be supportive. I think that's one piece that I'm seeing that's a little bit different with this round of investments.
That's great. One fund that I've seen kind of lead in this space and come at it as more of an additive than, okay, these are separate and we're trying to do both philanthropy and VC funding is Chris Lyons at A16Z and the Cultural Leadership Fund, I think is doing a really interesting model where they're doing straight up VC investment, but then they also have a philanthropic sort of lens on it on the backside of the investment. So I think that that's really unique. There are a lot of kind of different models coming out that maybe aren't even thinking of the funds that they're creating as impact investments, but they're more like, this is our investment thesis, and it happens to include a cultural aspect to it. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, if I can add to that just really quickly, Alexa, I would say we have that, and I want to just reiterate, we have that exact same approach. We evaluate every fund from, again, that equity perspective. I'm mostly aligned to the philanthropic charitable foundation arm of Bank of America, but we also evaluate to see if there's a 501c3, if there is an opportunity to fund from a grant perspective, especially if it's a new fund and we're trying to establish a fund. We've seen that a lot. A lot of new funds are just trying to get stood up. And how can we support from an operating cost, operating expense, stand-up perspective with actual grant dollars? If that opportunity is there, we absolutely are taking a look at doing both.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So everyone on this panel, including myself, works for an organization where people, perhaps people of color and perhaps also LGBTQIA plus people might be in the minority. So what do you guys think it means for these funds to be generated or administered by people who are not from the backgrounds that they're hoping to serve? I've heard a little bit of this in your comments so far. I'd love to hear from Damola and Brianna also as founders. What do you think the impacts are of people managing funds that are for specific communities when they're not from those backgrounds?
I don't like it personally. It
Say more.
rubs me the wrong way. It makes me uncomfortable. I don't like it. If you're running if there's a large check LP in a big fund and the fund manager doesn't resemble the background of the investments that he or she or they are trying to make, that is immediately a pretty bad signal to me. You can't.
Do you think there are things they might be missing? And if so, do you want to specify for our audience what those things might be?
Sorry, Alexa, repeat that one more time, what they might be missing.
Or yeah, what if, yeah. So it rubs you a bad way, and is that because you think there might be things they're missing that others, if they were from those backgrounds, wouldn't miss?
Yeah, things are missing, but I think more importantly, it's just a missed opportunity to bring in somebody that can that's more than capable of running a fund that is specifically targeted towards a socioeconomic category or demographic or whatever the case may be, or ethnic group or orientation group, and not being able to source a fund manager that represents or is from that group or can, I think that's a missed opportunity. There's already a lack of quote unquote diverse fund managers. And that to me is a lost opportunity to be very intentional about having a fund manager that resembles the audience, the founders that he, she, they are trying to fund.
Absolutely. Anyone else on this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways I can see where it rubs you the wrong way, especially when there, like you said, Damola, there's not enough leaders of funds, backgrounds that are even matching. Like, I think it's even less than like the actual number of founders that are out there, right? And I'm personally inspired to build a company that's even more successful because we have more than 50% Black or woman-led or LGBT-led investors on our cap table. And so the only time that I see that it works is with, especially just referencing one of our investors, and that's at Chloe Capital, run by two white women out of New York. And, in ways, and if you think about even last year, where the amount of VC dollars dropped for women, and it is a challenge for women still with all the growth that and all of the access that we see white women have compared to a lot of other minority groups. It is still a very big challenge. And so that's when it's worked, especially if they're intentional and they build a great portfolio and they're mindful of how they build with us and offer services beyond just a check. But I do think I do have to agree precisely with Damola that I think it in ways rubs me the wrong way. But, if, for example, maybe the ED or the lead of the fund is a white cis male, I would at least expect that the associates and the rest of his partners are of some diverse background.
Absolutely. Anyone else? I'll just share that for me, most of my career has actually been in finance. And so I was in nonprofit finance, and then I was in philanthropy, and now I work in tech, but I'm also an angel investor. And the reason I kind of had a catalyst moment where I decided that, oh, I have to do this. And that was when I was sort of transitioning from the nonprofit world to the tech world. I was working with an impact investing group, and then I started working with an angel group to help them with their impact investing metrics. And I started sitting in on pitch meetings with angel investors for startup companies. And over again, I kept hearing questions posed to more diverse, and everyone's diverse, so the word diversity, but people, primarily women and people of color, questions to these founders that were more harsh and had a, sort of undercurrent of doubt in them. And that's something that's very nuanced and it's hard to explain to people. But a lot of the investors I was learning from and working with at that time were white men. And I, called it out to them a couple of times, and they absolutely wanted to kind of figure out what their biases might be, why, maybe it was the type of business, all of these things. But ultimately, because I had worked in philanthropy and been an asset allocator, I realized, oh, I have to do it, because there are things other people aren't going to see, and there's only so much I can explain, but my lived experience is going to be useful to a founder one day, in addition to all of my finance experience, in addition to all of everything I know about running a business and, my advanced degrees, all the things. But in addition to all of that, being an asset allocator of color is going to be the representation someone needs in the room to ask the right questions, to find the right founders in a way that other people can't do. So at this point, I think of it as a superpower. And I think that there are plenty of people of color and underrepresented people who are completely talented and able to run funds and decide who the next, unicorn, decacorn businesses should be, but really is going to take kind of the removal of this framing of doubt of like, oh, can they do it? Do they need help? Maybe just, and I think it's going to take time to make those shifts. So that's my 2 cents on that. I'm going to move on here. So, and this just briefly, if anyone can comment for the audience, there might be, I'm assuming, some founders in the audience who are thinking about applying to some of these opportunity funds and aren't sure if they're actually making good or, making the impact that they say they're going to make in the market. So if anybody can highlight, what have been some success stories you've heard so far from these opportunity funds? And Kimberly, I know you have many examples from Bank of America, so you can, I'll let you take it off.
For hours about the amazing people that we've been meeting through this commitment. And I'm just trying to think of a couple that come off the top, but I will say this. So it's not just the equity piece, but it's the philanthropic piece. And it's also, we work really closely with community development, financial institutions, to supporting small businesses. We also work closely with minority depository institutions, right? Black, Hispanic, Asian American, Native American led banks and local communities making equity investments there as well. So we're trying to attack it from multiple perspectives. And one of the funds that I think about is actually a CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution in Florida. It's led by a Black woman. And during the crisis, during COVID in 2020, she was struggling with moving from a in-person approach to supporting the community to an online approach because of the pandemic. And so not even thinking about the equity, I mean, we've supported her in that way, but we quickly ensured that we could give her grant funding, capital grant funding to support her operations, to move it to a virtual position. It was critical to keep small business owners afloat. She was also able to provide PPP lending as part of her program. So again, she needed to be able to do all of that online. And so the dollars that we provided to her enabled her to be able to bring everything onto a virtual platform. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the number of business owners that she was able to support and the dollars that she was able to in turn infuse in support of those small business owners was really substantial and impactful to that local community. So that's just one story that comes to mind immediately. And then others are just meeting with these fund managers, some of which again are startup, very new, this is their first fund, and being able to say to them, we believe in you, we believe in your capabilities, and we're going to invest in you. And the type of responses that we get back, and the joy and the just excitement that someone is finally seeing the potential and the value here and willing to make that investment. And again, listening to say, and what else can we do? This is helpful, but what are the other gaps and how can we be supportive? It is really impactful and it's life-changing. We always, when I think about generational wealth, and I think about this commitment, just real quick, and I'll get off my soapbox, it's not just small business, but it's the health aspect. It is the housing aspect. It's the jobs. There's a whole person that needs to be supported to really see economic mobility and to really close the racial wealth gap. I think small business is at the heart of that, right? If we can get our under-resourced communities driving their own businesses and employing their own community, we'll really see an adjustment and change around economic mobility and wealth in communities of color. And so when I think about that, it is again supporting the whole person in everything we do, just to make sure that we can move the dial in this space.
You know, it's always the bankers that have the positive stories and then the lawyers that have the negative ones, right? But people wouldn't come to lawyers if not to protect them from the downside, right? So that's why, that's what we do. So what I would say is, you know, I've seen a lot of successes, but also watch out for the, you know, and do your diligence, just like they're going to be diligencing you. You know, you should be diligencing, as if you're a founder, these funds, right? Like you can Google diversity focused investment funds and just lists of VCs will come up in lists of names. But not all VCs are the same, and do your work, right? Because they're not all going to be good partners and apply the same criteria that you would to selecting an investor generally, to selecting, you know, an investor that's investing based on diversity, right? And I can think about, for example, there was one diversity fund that came to me and was looking for me to be their counsel because I do work in the space, and you know, and the first deal that they wanted me to do, I was like looking at their terms and like, this is completely off market. This is so aggressive. You know, you're just stealing their company from them for like nothing. You know, like not even $1 million. You're like buying their entire company. This is just not. This isn't market, and it's not right. I'm like, yeah, well, you know, we're the money that they can get, and they don't know any better. And you know, they're from North Carolina. Like, what do they know? You know, and these are the terms we want. And I did not take that work, right? Like I got a bad feeling from it. And like to quote Grace Jones, right? Like if the fuck don't feel right, don't fuck it. I passed the work on because I did not want to work with these people. And so, you know, there's going to be, even in the community of people that are trying to support our communities, there are people that will not actually support, you know, you in your community, and they will look like you and be a member of that community. And so that's just something to watch out for. Do your diligence.
Yeah, that actually leads me into my next set of questions, which is around vetting funds as a founder. So those were some good tips. Does anyone else have tips for founders to select what they might be a good fit for, and what might be a good fit for them?
Yeah, I can jump in. To echo Fredo's point, not everybody's for the culture, so beware. But yeah, not what is it? Not all skin folk can folk, right? But the thing that I try to like tell other folks, other founders, is that at the end of the day, you just want the right partners. Like that's the big thing. You know, you limiting yourself to only focusing on diversity focused funds or opportunity funds in your kind of pipeline of firms and funds to reach out to is not a good idea. It should be much more expansive than that. And you should be trying to target the right partner that you feel comfortable, the right fund and the right partner that you feel comfortable with, right? That maybe you really care about working with a former operator. Well, you want to work with a partner at a fund that was a former operator. Maybe you're a SaaS company and you really want to work with somebody with a firm that has invested in a lot of SaaS companies in adjacent categories to yours, right? It's really more about the right partner, and you want to fill in that pipeline with diversity focused funds, with opportunity funds, but just limiting the scope of your pipeline and your investor outreach to diversity focused funds / opportunity funds, I don't think is a good idea. And it's also great to just lean on your network. So that's worked really well for me, just having kind of that broad scope of outreach.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea too. I actually had, one of my earliest investors came on just a few months after Arlen came on, just cool white guy out of Chicago who happens to have a portfolio of more than 50% women or diverse founders. And he actually told me about a fund led by a white male and a black male that was a no-go. It's like people just had super bad experiences there. So I think one, don't limit your money to funds run by the diverse managers, even though I do think that it's really awesome to look at our cap table and see how many women-led funds are on there. But there's so many opportunities for learning from other portfolio members, getting introductions, finding potential customers, having to think about, Series A and beyond, and limiting that sort of limits your opportunity for your own business development and growth. But there are a lot more funds coming online every single year. I want to give a shout out to Atlanta-based Collab Capital that just raised $50 million from lots of great LPs, some of the world's top companies. And so we have more opportunities to get money directly and bigger checks directly from just amazing fund managers. But I would say for us, at least, especially being in food and ag and tech, really rapidly growing part of venture capital sort of fund allotment, we have more than 23% of our investment comes from Asia. And it's been a very helpful part of our growth. So continue to look pretty broadly, but I have intention about sort of partnership and feeling just that good connection to the folks that are coming in that are going to be with you through, probably the life of your company.
Yeah, one thing I tell founders a lot is that, if you're taking VC funding or even certain amounts of angel funding, you have to want to work with that person in some capacity for the next at least 10 years. You're not just going to take their money and be like, okay, peace. You want to choose investors that understand your business, maybe understand you as a person, and maybe even your personality, believe in what you're building, and will actually be there for you. I've actually heard of a few founders who were so excited. They got a ton of money from, a really great blue chip investor. And, then after the money hit, they weren't getting money for follow-on rounds. They weren't able to get on the phone with anyone. They weren't, and it seemed a little bit like, oh, okay, you guys just chose us to check off a box, but actually this isn't a relationship. And so not all money is good money. I'll just say that. And the other thing is that one thing I'm seeing more and more, which I think is really cool, is sort of the reverse pitch. So where investors will have to pitch sort of a panel of startup companies. I think startup founders really need to understand that there's a give and take, and you have power too. So anyone who's investing in your company, their success is tied to your success. Their success is tied to your labor and your late nights and everything that you're doing. So you want investors that are, of course, they're not running your company, but are as invested as you need them to be your partners in the long run. Do you have any tips on how founders can prepare to apply for these opportunity funds? I know that Fredo was mentioning that there's sort of a little bit more of a burden of proof on the criteria of some of these funds, where you can prove you have revenue, you can prove you have product market fit and all these things. But if they're giving you an investment based on the identity of the founders or maybe the identity of your customers, and that might change, like, any tips on how founders can demonstrate that and sort of make themselves more competitive for these specific types of funds?
I would say don't be generic, and don't just have the same presentation for everybody, right? Like, a lot of times we'll advise our clients to have a couple different pitch decks, right? Like, because you've got different types of investors that are looking for different things, and so some of them aren't going to care at all about D&I. Like, that's just that is a box they'll check, and that's fine. But they're a good investor, and that's one presentation. Others, it's going to be way more important and put it up front. So have a couple of different pitch decks that are focused on different things for one, and for two, make the story more compelling than just, we're diverse and we care about diversity, because that's what everybody is saying, right? So where's the diversity, right? Is it in the board and the C-suite, or is it just in, in the rank and file? Because the data could be hiding something actually quite, different, where, prove up the I, right? Like, diversity is easy, but what about inclusion, right? Like, what's your turnover rate? If your turnover rate for, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, folks of color is 3 times the turnover rate for white people, then yeah, you maybe have high levels of diversity, but no one's actually advancing in the rank and succeeding, right? So what's your turnover? Like, think, about what's that next level of data that can prove something that other people aren't. How to get the I in the DNI, how to prove out that you're focused on this particular community because it's actually related to your business model, right? That they can't just take this, have a bunch of VCs take control of the board, pivot, and then market what you've done for the white community or the straight community, because there's no, tie. How is it that you are specifically focused on this community? That's sort of, I think, the next level beyond just, we're diverse.
Absolutely. And kind of going back to my point about, and a couple of people have made this point, that your investors are people you're in relationship with. Do you guys have any tips on how founders can start to build relationships with fund managers?
I think the big thing is, like, throw them on a CRM and give good updates, right? Meet periodically. It's straight up just like building any other relationship. If you're really smart about it, or be smart about it, talk to other founders. But the main thing is trying to make sure that you're connected, that you're helping investors connect the dots of your story over time. So soon, like, it's always, I'm always for, if there's an investor intro to be made, like, I always opt in, right? If an investor wants to talk, or somebody's like, hey, I know this firm that you should connect with, even if we're not raising, it's good to take that call and you add them to your CRM, and you keep the conversation going. You send updates, you check in, especially if you really like them, you like that partner, right? You say, hey, just wanted to check in and catch up, and you don't focus exclusively on yourself and your business, right? Like, these are people. Even me, like, I know early, year or two ago, when first starting trying to raise, like, that was something that I didn't keep in mind, was I was just always kind of like, hey, I just got to get down to business. This is a transactional relationship. But over time, it's like, fund managers are interesting people. Like, they got to a point in their career for a reason. It's kind of fun just getting to know, like, their story and learning more about them, and just treating people as people. So I think that's the big thing, right? As soon as you talk to somebody, ask see if they want to opt into your updates. Always send, if you're especially early stage, try to send updates consistently on, like, progress, what's going on, be able to draw that line. And then when you talk, Like, don't focus just on the transaction, focus on the person a little bit and build that relationship. And I think eventually it works out. And sometimes, and most of the time, they're not going to invest. Doesn't mean it's a wasted relationship. You never know how that could come back full circle. 95% of the time, they're not going to invest, right? And that's okay. Like, that's expected. That's the game that we're playing in the market that we're in. But again, people, like, it's always fun getting to know folks.
And Damola, you and I met at a co-working space in Minnesota. And I often get the question, I'm in San Francisco. I do travel a lot, specifically to meet startups that are not in San Francisco. But, do you or anyone else on the panel can answer this? Do you have any insights into how do you meet investors if you're not on the coast? I get that question a lot. So I'm curious if anyone has insights there.
I mean, I personally feel like there's so many investors now. We raise like millions of dollars on Zoom. So like, I don't think it matters too much anymore. I'm in Austin, lots of folks are moving there. Lots of folks moved to Durham and North Carolina and Houston and Atlanta and Miami. So I think, and there's a good market in the Midwest as well. I think the last 12 months have really shifted that conversation. I don't think we're going to be asking that much anymore, but I would keep tabs on like opportunities to like pitch and get your name into a bucket, so that you can sort of get that initial exposure where folks will start reaching out to you. And I think another powerful tool for connecting with investors is obviously through LinkedIn, but also through Twitter. I think Twitter is doing a great job of just building this sort of startup and VC community. There's many opportunities every week on Clubhouse, even though that's shifting a little bit with just the traffic. But, I absolutely believe that like the coasts don't hold the money anymore. One thing that I haven't been seeing, and I want to just have this be a bigger part of the conversation, is like LGBT, like specifically like trans, like fund managers, and like how do people feel comfortable coming from that community, not like Black or Latinx, where there's a lot more focus. But like I remember meeting like at I think the MBA, like the Gay MBA Association, like a fund manager that was gay out of San Francisco. And I was like, whoa, like an openly gay fund manager. I don't think there's enough of that conversation, enough highlighting of that. I think people would feel really comfortable going into venture, especially like trans founders, if they had more exposure there. So I would love to like dive into that a little bit more here, because I don't think that there's enough. I don't even, I mean, other than Arlen, who's an investor of ours, like I cannot name that many other like LGBTQ led funds.
100%. Does anybody have, we can talk about that now. Like we can go off script a little bit. Does anybody know of any LGBTQIA focused funds, at least, or with queer fund managers?
Gangels is the only other one I can think of. Paul over there.
Mm-hmm.
This is like, the thing about being at Start Out, right? It's an LGBT entrepreneurs organization. So probably the Start Out like organizers have plenty of names that they can throw in.
Yeah. I know a few angel investors like myself, but I don't know that many fund managers yet who are queer. Start Out, do you have any additions here?
This is an excellent question, and just from I'm seeing some people in the chat also chime in from our community, talking about Loud Capital, Pride Fund, but to everyone's point here, not just from the Start Out perspective, but just from the general perspective, it is a desired space for people to move into. So I think access to education and resources, if you come from a queer or trans perspective, of how to step into and invest in that space more, more so that we can move and have more than just, a handful that we can point to off the top of our heads. Of course, Backstage Capital is typically the first that comes to mind to me, and Arlen has been such a voice in this space as to why we need to go and move the conversation away from underestimated and into, or underrepresented and into underestimated, that there are people out there, but do they have access to the education they need to even start or step into that space? That is the question, I think, just generally for me.
Absolutely. I think for me, it's access to the education, but it's also access to the opportunities. This kind of goes back to an earlier point I made about, about underrepresented founders being seen as having, there's a bias, like, oh, are you ready to do this? Are you capable of doing this? There's a doubt that I think comes from bias. And I think it's very, very, very similar to being a fund manager. There's a doubt when you're raising from limited partners, oh, is this the right person to do this? They're not who typically I would expect to be in charge of a fund of X size. I know many underrepresented fund managers who have raised funds or tried to raise funds and weren't as successful as they wanted to be because there was an underlying layer of doubt. So I think that's, absolutely an important conversation and something to build some tangible programs around, because I think it's a network that it exists, but like needs to be brought together a little bit more. So that's awesome.
I love that point. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. I'm going to move forward a little bit for time and move into a little bit of kind of understanding how, unfortunately, tokenism can come into play in opportunity funds. And we talked about it a little bit before, like checking a box. I will actually mention that there are 2 articles that I think would be great for people to check out that came out this week. One was by Stephanie Lamkin, who's the CEO of Blendor, and it's actually a study of $4.56 billion worth of diversity pledges that were made by 159 tech companies. And it sort of evaluates the efficacy of what's happened with those funds, and also the diverse makeup of the companies who put those funds out and how that may relate to how those funds are doing. So I think that's a really interesting cut at the data that came out this week and is in Forbes. And then there was another article, it was similar, similarly kind of thinking about the efficacy of these funds in the last year since George Floyd's murder, and sort of the funds that came out as a reaction to that. And this one was by Barry Williams, and it's featured in Fast Company. And I think the title is something like, have tech companies kept their promises? So I want to talk a little bit, go back and talk a little bit about tokenism and sort of what might be the pitfalls of having diverse funds or funds that are sort of pitched as opportunity funds. Damoli, you don't have a thought, really?
I have many thoughts. I mean, there's the thing that worries me, and I don't have any evidence to support this, it's just a worry, is that raising, so I'm not sure how many opportunity funds can lead rounds relative to their investment thesis, like the kind of the where within the startup lifespan they try to more Series A, B, seed stage, whatever. I'm not sure how many actually will go out and like lead around, and that to me is a problem in and of itself. But for the ones that do, my concern is that it may be viewed by the broader, like when you go out and you raise your next round, or like you're trying to fill out the round, that it is more of a philanthropic, like this is like it's an impact driven investment that could drop the valuation or the perception of the actual market opportunity that's present, that type of thing. It kind of like, I'm worried that it potentially changes the view of the business and harms it in a way where it drops down the value, like the perceived like long-term value of the business could be harmed. That's my concern. Again, no evidence to support this. I don't know, but it is something that I think about, I'm concerned about. At the same time, like going back to my earlier point, I really do think it's important for more opportunity funds to be able to lead rounds, not just let a different lead investor, set the terms, do most of the due diligence and that type of thing, and then follow on. I think starting out, that's fine, and having a good balance of that, but I just haven't seen enough funds that are out there, enough firms that have funds that are out there that are opportunity focused, come out and say like, hey, we're lead investors and our thesis is X, Y, Z, right? And I think that's those two things are pretty problematic.
I'll say too that, yeah, you brought up a really good point. I'm not going to call out any funds in particular, but I do know that last year, a couple of these opportunity funds came under fire a little bit because the terms seemed a little bit predatory and like they might not be as founder friendly as some of their other opportunities for founders who aren't seeking DEI funds or don't fit into a DEI bucket. So that's a concern that I have too, of actual, the terms of these funds being, not as advantageous as they would be to other founders, and that being sort of baked in to taking opportunities that wouldn't be otherwise available. Fredo, I can see you have a comment.
No, I think, and Kimlin will know what I'm about to talk about because she knows CDFIs, but like, when you've got philanthropic money or quasi-philanthropic money, it turns out that there's more strings attached rather than fewer, right? When I first started practicing 13 years ago, I thought like, oh, philanthropic money should be easy because we're wanting you to do the good. But the problem is because we've got to ensure that you're putting the funds to good use for tax reasons, for other ethical and reporting reasons, there's actually more strings attached and sometimes even harsher terms than, someone that's just like, yeah, $2 million safe, sure, here's the money, right? Like, give me the YC form. And so the for PRI loans, CDFI deals, even some of these like impact or opportunity funds, I can see why they can be a little bit more difficult. Now, I think that there's a line between there are more strings attached because of regulatory and other considerations, and I wanted to, like I talked about earlier, wanting to make sure that you're achieving the impact, and if you're not, then we're going to take the money and put it somewhere else. There's that kind of thing, which is fair game, and you should just expect that from some opportunity-focused funds, there will be more strings. That's fair game. There's the other side that is, legitimate predatory, which is the other story I was talking about earlier, where it just sort of crossed the line between just taking advantage of ignorance or perceived ignorance. I hope that company didn't take the money. I don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I do think as well, there's a struggle a little bit with calling anything a X fund, like not just, okay, this is a financial investment fund, we expect 10X, the end, that is what we're investing in. Because I think there is a perception, and even with, philanthropy, there's a perception that if you're looking at anything that's not only financial returns, or in my mind, it's not looking at financial returns. It's just not looking at financial returns as though they don't exist in a societal sort of experience. Like they don't exist in a vacuum. But I think there is a perception that sometimes opportunity funds or something that's called X fund is based on charitable dollars, or it's based on like a gift, just, oh, we feel good about this. There's no vetting process. Here you go. When frankly, what I've seen in the venture capital space is that there are a lot lower barriers to entry and a lot of venture capital dollars than there are in philanthropic dollars. So that's just been my experience so far. But
I do want to.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to add something because I want to shine a light on her. Like Arlen Hamilton does the best job of articulating her thesis around, not underrepresented, underestimated founders. And that's straight up, yo, y'all tripping. There's all this money out here. I'm gonna go get it. Like, it's really that, it's that simple. You know what I mean? Like, if everybody could just have that same, general, y'all been tripping. I'm gonna come in and go get all this money. Like that is that's essentially what she's saying. And I think that it makes me feel good to know that is who's on my cap table, right? It doesn't feel philanthropic in any capacity. It's not, right? It's the opposite of that. It's straight up ruthless capitalism, which is good, you know what I mean, in certain aspects. And I just think that there could that shine needs to be put more on other quote unquote opportunity funds or opportunity funds in general. That would be really helpful for us as founders.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think at the end of the day, if you're an investor, your goal should be to find opportunities that other people have missed. And investing in underrepresented founders seems obvious to me for the same reasons. So yeah, 100% agree. Did anybody else want to comment on that before we move on? Okay, great. Does anyone have thoughts about how these funds can make their processes more transparent on the front end before people apply to them, before people pursue these dollars? And this may have been something we touched on a little bit, kind of talking about the barriers to entry or, the regulatory environment that some of these funds exist in. All right, no thoughts there, that's fine. So does anyone have thoughts about how so in an ideal world, right, not necessarily the funds that exist right now, but if you could design a fund that would reach the right people, what components would be included in that? Like, what would need to happen? How would it need to be marketed? Who would need to run it? How big would it need to be in your mind to be effective? I'm going to start with Rihanna here because
I think looking at metrics and returns that are not deemed like just a sort of philanthropic sort of impact fund where people don't think they're really gonna have any true winners. I think there really needs to be at least probably 20 million and writing checks of, at least 500 to $1 million. And leading or co-leading some seed rounds, perhaps even Series A. That's really where you're going to see the success with some exits, but you're also going to see when we think about I would say even maybe 7 years ago when I first was looking at sort of impact funds that were focused on minority founders or founders that were doing things in sustainability or jobs or something like that. They were writing checks of 25, 75K. And these companies were dying out pretty fast because I think they were pretty much underfunded, especially when they were in the middle of the country. And so we need to make sure that they believe that they're investing in something that can both change an industry and also has a founder that has a unique lens and skill set that can prove out a very successful business. And writing small checks and having a portfolio of 50 companies with 50K in investment, I don't think is going to really cut it. Now, granted, that is how Backstage started, but they're starting to deploy a lot larger check sizes, and they're also building relationships that are bringing on really substantial seed rounds.
I would say that this is going to be similar with any kind of anytime that you're trying to have an impact fund of whatever sort, is first you got to figure out what's the impact that you want to have. And that's not just, that's based on what you care about, as well as what the people that are going to be giving you money care about. And that's kind of a conversation to have. And then once you sort of, so what area of diversity do we care about, and what community? And then, you've got to figure out, well, what's the depth of impact, right? Like you could have a huge impact on a small number of people, or a small impact on a large number of people, right? And I think that gets to what Damola was saying, where it's like, let's have people lead funds. Well, I think a lot of the diversity funds are like, well, if we just make $500 to $1.5 million checks, it'll get people through their Series Seed and Series A, and in that early stage where it's really hard to raise money. And then, they'll be able to get money from the real VCs for their Series B and C later on. And that way we can just get more people, through the pipeline at a critical stage. So I think, it just depends on your focus.
I want to comment on that, both of what Fredo said, as well as Rihanna. Like, it's really unfair, to be honest with you, that opportunity funds that are generally managed by diverse people that are not straight white men have to do most of the de-risking work, and then be the check that goes in, de-risks these high risk investments, so that now they're nice and shiny for the Series A or Series B investors to come in and cherry pick the ones that are gonna get them to that 10x multiple, right? It's actually kind of unfair, and very like just straight up unfair. Like, so to me, one piece is definitely, yes, lead investors, right? Like you need to be able to like write checks that lead round at the seed stage. But why can't there be fund managers? There should be fund managers at the Series B, like at every stage of the de-risk. All those stages are just the companies that have been de-risked to a certain degree at each stage, right? And it's not fair that most of the folks that the opportunities that are presented to fund managers that are not straight white men are at the riskiest parts of a company's life cycle. It's just straight up unfair.
I don't disagree with that. I think that's
systemic undervaluing.
I agree too.
All around. Yeah, plus 100. So we have a couple more sort of prepped questions here, and then we're going to move pretty soon to questions from the audience. I think along the lines of, what's needed to create funds that are actually impactful, is this question of like, how can a fund ensure mission alignment with their portfolio companies? So is it continued ownership and management by diverse individuals? Is it a commitment on the front end that they will commit to investing in future rounds? So what are the things that I think can create a bit less tokenism, frankly, but also ensure that the opportunity isn't just a one-time opportunity for diverse founders? I know these are meaty questions. I'm asking you like 12-part questions. So
is the question, how can you ensure that the founders that raise money from opportunity funds, that they get more than one shot?
Well, that's one example of it. The question is really, how can these funds be structured in a way that they're giving continued support to these founders, and it's not just a one-time check that they can put on a list and say, we did this one time, but that we're actually setting up these founders for success.
Yeah, I mean, I think more funds, I think more of these sort of opportunity or diverse-led funds are raising, like they're going out and raising additional rounds or closing, after 6-12 months because they want to come in and follow on. I think if most of these funds have a follow-on thesis where they can support you through, IPO, whether that be, I would say most of our investors can probably follow on with checks of equal or greater size. And that's something that I definitely am looking for. And that's something that should be a part of their model. Like, we are going to allot 50% of our fund to first checks. That's not going to go to any new portfolio members. The other 50% is only going to be for the portfolio that's existing, to make sure that they can, have a bridge round, or we can come in later rounds and sort of boost it up so that they can close faster as well.
This has been a tough issue with trying to make sure that your fund managers stay mission aligned, and it's hard because they're being compensated based off of the fund's returns, right? And so when you try to and people are motivated by money, people that like it's obviously right. If you're in this, then you sort of presumably have some belief in capitalism, right? Even the ability of capitalism to do good, right? And so if you try to and so how do you split compensating people based on the actual economic return of their portfolio investments versus also the mission, and frankly I don't think anyone has a good answer to that one. That's been an issue for years and years, but not just within the context of diversity funds, but in any kind of impact focused vehicle, and we still don't have an answer. I don't know that we ever will, because it's just an inherent tension.
I want to ask just a little bit of a curveball question, because I think it might be helpful to our audience. I've had many conversations with fund managers and founders about, finding investors, fund managers. I recently got involved in a friend of mine's fund, Rare Breed VC. And he's a Black new fund manager, funding in the Midwest and the East Coast. Stonely Baptiste, who runs the Urban Us Fund. They both kind of found success looking outside of their metro areas. Can anyone talk about, I think this conversation has been very US focused. Can anyone talk about what you've seen looking at getting investments outside of the US, or maybe from non-typical areas even in the US? And I know Rihanna spoke a little bit about how some of her investors are from Asia. Like, can you talk at all about how that experience of fundraising might have been a little bit different for you?
Yeah, all of our investments outside of North America are not for, the sort of diversity lens, even though we're starting to get sort of queuing up for folks that are interested in African diaspora. But they're really around the like industry or mission lens. Like, we want you to change, food and agriculture, right? Sustainability. And so I think there are a lot of investors in other parts of the world. You can even go up to like Canada, but especially like in Asia, where you can see the deployment of funds from like Japan, China, Singapore, Australia. There's some good funds out of Hong Kong that are interested in investing in North American companies. The diversity issue is interesting. I don't know the numbers. I know that like I do know that one of our Asian funds is like really, really low on Black founders, but their focus is to invest in sort of companies that are changing the futures of many industries. And so like if you have, especially like a sustainability or like AI lens, I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunities outside of the US.
Have you found that funding environment to be different or more inviting in any way than the US? Because that's something that I've heard.
Yeah, I mean, they move faster, and I would say there's less expenses on like the legal end. Sorry, Fredo, but they're finding ways to like resource you up without like basically spending their money on sort of the like checklist items.
I just wanted to jut in and to just go back, because I realized after I started talking that I had an actual answer to both a question, Alexa, you had asked, as well as one of the people had asked in the Q&A. But like the question of how do we make sure that people are focused and aligned? That actually is relevant to the question that was asked about the use of public benefit corporation forms and some of these new corporate forms. And I don't know why I just didn't link them in my mind together, but that is the one thing that we see different now. So Delaware created a new statute that allows for public benefit LLCs, which are new limited liability company forms like the public benefit corporation, only to some an LLC, where the boards of directors, the board of managers of the LLC, in addition to having a fiduciary duty to maximizing shareholder value, or also has a duty to a mission that is chosen between the shareholder or between the members of the LLC and the LLC itself. And so, and that could be, so you could build in a mission that is almost like a nonprofit pro bono mission of, supporting the Latinx or the LGBT community or LGBT entrepreneurs as being built into your mission. And that is something that, so I mentioned that, compensation, that's still going to be a problem. But if people are ethically obligated to not only pursue financial return, but also to support this community, you have locked that mission in. And because they can then be sued by their members for breach of fiduciary duty if they only act in the interest of profit and not in the interest of the mission. And this actually was a very powerful tool that we used in setting up the California Rebuilding Fund. So after the pandemic started in about March, April, we got together with some of our friends, and MoFo is the biggest law firm in San Francisco, and we and do a ton of pro bono work, and just got together Republicans, Democrats, and put together the CASE task force, the California Small Enterprise Task Force, and essentially created what became the California Rebuilding Fund, which was adopted by the governor as California's official fund that we just started doing pro bono to set up. With a lot of CFIs, like real banks, putting in money to basically support minority-owned businesses like in the Mission, in the Bay Area, and all across California. And we used a public benefit LLC as sort of one of the intermediate vehicles there to lock in that mission and ensure that no, this wouldn't just become about maximum return. It would actually be about supporting local communities. And this is sort of different than the venture capital world, right? Like the California Rebuilding Fund, it's about small businesses, not scalable startups. But it's an interesting concept. And so, for those of you that are thinking about, well, how do I lock in mission to an opportunity fund? Well, you could use a public benefit LLC and build that into your mission. And I think that's been a tool that we've been using pretty recently.
I think that's incredible. And I want to remind folks that this is being recorded and will be available later. So if I were a founder on this call, I would rewatch it and write down all of the resources that we've sort of been spouting out. I think that's incredibly helpful. We only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to switch to audience questions. And I think we'll have time to answer maybe 3 of them, maybe more. And I'm going to start with this because I want to hear from Kimmelin. So Kimmelin hit on something that I've been struggling with. My business has been so badly impacted by wildfires and now the pandemic. Since that, I've been an entrepreneur with great employees, but have been facing constant security speculation. How can entrepreneurs seeking funding be sure they are whole, not facing food, housing, and medical insecurity, and get back to leading in the communities they serve? What are some of the best practices for finding funding post-pandemic that are not capitalizing on the large amount of speculation and risk? It's an interesting question.
Very interesting question, and happy to rejoin the conversation. I was learning so much from Fredo, Brianna.
Yeah, I was like, come back.
We're talking about the funds. It's like, yeah, so that was good information. So it's been said here tonight, there is so much capital, there's so much money in the wake of where we are as a nation, where we are across the globe, just in response to the civil unrest and the pandemic. I think a lot of corporations have stood up in various ways to respond to the needs of local communities. So I think the first thing that folks need to understand, I think Damalo said it, is like, I'm going to get this money, right? There's so much money available, and just finding the right opportunity to take hold. I spend my time meeting with organizations and institutions who have pitches daily, right? I sit on calls all day with folks making pitches on the equity side and the philanthropic side. And then one of the things that I see in full transparency is that a lot of folks get in front of our team, and they're not prepared, right? They come with an ask and they're not clear on their objectives or their goals and or what they need, right? So when I'm sitting there listening, I'm asking, do you have a 501c3? Are you prepared to take equity? Like, are you structured to be able to receive the capital that's available to you? And a lot of the times we're getting no's. So what I would say is structure your business in such a way that you are ready and able to receive the funding, the capital that's available to you. So if you have a small business, why not set up a foundation or philanthropic arm of that organization, of your company, to be able to help you with some of those operating expenses, money you do not have to pay back. It's grant dollars to support your operating costs. Structure your business in such a way that you can receive that type of funding. I would say, to the question that was asked, just make sure you're available to do that. And don't underestimate, again, all that's out there. Do your research. I mean, look at some of the top banks and some of the top companies that, again, have created these commitments and are actually infusing capital. Look at community development financial institutions and money depository institutions. Go beyond VCs even and look for other avenues to be able to receive capital. So I just say, do your research.
That's great. And in the interest of time, I think we have time for maybe one more question. And I think this is a great question because it's something that we don't talk about a lot, or in this space, we don't talk about a lot. I think a lot of underrepresented communities talk about this a lot. So the stress of building personal relationships from Damola was helpful, but can also be daunting. Does anyone have tips for working class entrepreneurs who aren't used to building relationships with wealthy people and are seeking to build relationships with VC investors, fund managers, et cetera? And those and whose transness/queerness makes it even harder to relate, and who are very busy running their businesses. How to overcome these obstacles and feel like it's going to be worth it. I'm gonna start very quickly by saying that I think, VC funding is not always it, right? Like VC funding, actually, if you look at businesses that are successful that have been VC funded, it's in total a very, very small amount. I think it's great that VC is becoming more transparent and more a general conversation around small businesses. But I think there are crowdfunding campaigns that people can be doing on, so many startup crowdfunding sites that get you into contact with many, many more people that understand your business. And it's a lower barrier to entry around building very specific little special snowflake relationships. And it's like, here's my business. Here's what I'm doing. I'm the founder. I can make one video and I need, $100,000 up to, I think $5 million now to get to the next stage of my company. So I don't want to over-index on like VC is it. But what I will say is, when I was getting involved in this industry, I just got curious and I started going to university talks. I volunteered at conferences so that I could get access to conference speakers. I did all kinds of things that were about my learning about the industry, like understanding the lingo and putting myself in situations that weren't super stressful to like, oh, I'm over here doing this thing. I don't really know that much. I don't have anything to offer to the conversation. And really just, I entered it from a curiosity standpoint. So I think kind of getting out of your head about, oh, I'm a working class person. I don't have the same language or the right lingo. It's just people. It's just people, and anyone who would try to put you on a different level than them is not someone you want to talk to anyway, like frankly. So I would just say, like, take that mental barrier away. And there are many, many places where people will want to know about you and want to know about your business and will be curious about you. So I think I'm getting a little ping here. And we need to close out. So I'm going to hand it back to the Start Out staff. And thank you so much for being with us. Thank you to everybody on the panel.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alexa. Thank you, Start Out. Good chatting with you all.
Thank you so much, just everyone here. What an incredible conversation. What an incredible candor and honesty and passion and direction that you were all able to give. I so appreciate your perspectives and what you were able to share. For everyone in the audience today, Start Out, as a reminder, we are an organization that focuses on uplifting founders and driving toward the economic empowerment of LGBTQIA founders. And we do this through everything from community events. We also have one-to-one mentorship. We have office hours with experts. We have a 6-month accelerator program, and we have an investor portal. This is a part of the follow-up from the question that we did get earlier about what does Start Out do? And thank you, of course, in support with our sponsors. We have scholarships for these programs for founders that are seeking these types of relational access places. So if you were curious, please do visit us at www.startout.org. For more information, submit that founder application and let us know that you would be interested in a scholarship. Please do also save the date. Our next event is going to be June 3rd. This is for raising a VC fund for diverse managing partners at 3 p.m. Pacific time and 6 p.m. Eastern. Again, everyone, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. I hope you have a lovely evening, and we hope to see you again soon. Panelists, again, cannot appreciate you more. Take care.